I guess we're ready to start. Okay. Good morning. I'd like to call to order the Audit Subcommittee for the Legislative Commission. This is September 3rd, 2020. I'd like to welcome everybody to our second meeting of the Audit Subcommittee during this interim. You will note that the last meeting was originally scheduled for May 21st, but was canceled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The rescheduled meeting for July 14th was also canceled due to conflict with the 31st special session of the legislature. I'd like to provide special thanks to state agency representatives that are participating in today's meeting. Over the past several months, many of us have participated in meetings using this new format of a Zoom style meeting. And the only important thing is that when you're not speaking, please mute your microphone so that it doesn't create interference for the secretaries who will be recording and transcribing the meeting. At this time, I'd like to ask Mr. Crossman if he would be kind enough to call the roll.
Senator Brooks.
Here.
Senator Goycochea.
Here.
Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson. Assemblywoman Carlton.
I am here.
Chair Parks.
I'm here. Thank you for that. I believe Ms. Benitez Thompson will be hopefully joining us. Before we begin, I'd like to share a few housekeeping items for review for the benefit of the audience and those wishing to speak. Although we are meeting remotely, many of the same processes that we normally ascribe to remain in order. We will have two periods of public comment today, one at the beginning of the meeting and one at the end of the meeting. Public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker. There are 4 ways to provide public comment, all of which are listed on the agenda for this meeting. They included calling area code 669-900-6833, and then entering meeting identification number 989-2097-5962, followed by the pound sign. You may email comments to audit, the email address of audit@lcb.state.nv.us, or you may mail your comments to the Audit Division at 401 South Carson Street, Carson City, Nevada, 89701. Or finally, you may fax any comments you wish to 775-684-6435. As always, this meeting will be recorded and available on the legislature's website. Moving on to our agenda, item number 2 is public comment, and the LCB broadcasting and production staff, we refer to them as BPS, are coordinating the public comment telephone line. BPS staff, would you please add any callers for public comment at this time? Thank you.
Hello, Chair. The public comment line is open and working. There is no callers at this time.
Thank you. What we'll do is I'll just wait probably another minute in case somebody is in the process of dialing in. So we'll just stand at ease for 1 minute. Thank you. Okay, since we have not received anyone else wishing to provide public comment this time, once again, they'll be able to provide public comment at the end of the meeting. So I'd like to move forward at this time to agenda item number 3, which is the approval of the minutes for the meeting held on February 18th, 2020. Are there any questions regarding these minutes? If not, I'll accept a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
We have a motion by Assemblywoman Carlton, a second by Senator Gokachia. Is there any discussion? Mr. Crossman, would you be kind enough to take roll on this item?
Senator Brooks,
Yes.
Senator Goycochea,
Yes.
Senator Chair Parks,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson,
Yes.
and Assemblywoman Carlton.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Crossman. The motion passes. Moving on to the next agenda item, item number 4 is a presentation of audit reports. I'd like to start off with item 4A, and that's the State of Nevada Single Audit Report for the year ended June 30th, 2019. Mr. Crossman, would you like to provide some opening remarks?
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Dan Crossman, Legislative Auditor. The single audit for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2019 was performed under contract by the firm Eide Bailly. The single audit is required by the federal government for entities that accept and expend federal funds above a certain level. The statewide single audit, pursuant to the federal government's Office of Management and Budget's uniform guidance requirements, incorporates an audit of the state's financial statements and an audit of compliance with requirements related to the state's use of federal funds. I'd like to express our appreciation for the professionalism and flexibility of Eide Bailly in completing the single audit this year. The audit process is challenging as the auditors work with various state agencies' staff to accomplish their work and does require thousands of hours. Representatives from Eide Bailly are available today to make a brief presentation on this year's report and are available to answer any questions that the committee members might have. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Crossman. At this time, I'd like to invite members of the Eide Bailly staff to share with us any remarks they'd like to provide.
Thank you, Senator Parks. I am just want to do a quick introduction. Tammy Miramontes. I served as the engagement partner and the project manager for both the single audit and the financial statement audit. And with me from Eide Bailly are Nelsina Shirk, who ran the engagement team for the financial statement audit, and Kurt Schlicker, who ran the engagement team for the single audit. So first, I'd just like to give a quick overview of the results, and then we'll be turning the presentation over to Kurt, who will provide some additional information, just to put it into context as to our results in relation to the prior year. So as part of the single audit, we actually issue 3 reports as a result of those procedures. And I know that you have been provided the single audit report, and it's a very lengthy document. So I just want to point out where our reports are in case you wanted to peruse those or look at those at any time. So our first report is actually on pages 1 through 3 of the single audit report. And this is our main independent auditor's report over the financial statements themselves. And in that report, we have provided an unmodified opinion, which is the highest level of assurance that you can get that says that the financial statements are materially correct as they have been presented. And then moving on, we have a second report, which we issue in accordance with government auditing standards. In that report, we discuss any material non-compliance with laws and regulations, as well as any internal control deficiencies over the financial statements and the financial report. And in that report, I think it's on page 98. Yes, it can be found on page 98. We did actually identify 7 material weaknesses in this report, and those related to errors in recording highway fund payables and inventory, permanent school fund receivables, state agency fund for bond assets. We also noted additional errors were found regarding investment disclosures, outside bank account reconciliations, and reporting of infrastructure. And there were some accounting adjustments that were made to correct it. And then our final report begins on page 100. And this report is required as a result of uniform guidance. And this report covers the federal funds of the state receives. We look for compliance with each major federal program that we have identified, as well as internal controls over compliance. And then we also issue an opinion on the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. And in this report, you will note that we identified 33 findings. The most significant findings are those considered material weaknesses with material non-compliance. And a material weakness is a deficiency in internal controls, which is significant and results in non-compliance with the requirement of a federal program, which will not be detected or corrected on a timely basis. There were 21 of those types of findings in the report. And then our auditor's report on compliance also noted that the schedule of expenditures of federal awards is accurately stated. The CFA shows over $5.86 billion in federal awards as expended by the state in fiscal year 19, and CFA is the schedule. The schedule of findings and question costs begins on page 145. And so that actually is a summary of our audit results, as well as it provides details for each of the 40 things. The single audit report also contains management's response to auditor findings, including the prior year audit findings and corrective action plans prepared by the agencies. These are the blue pages in the back half of the hard copy report. As part of the audit process, we, as at Bailey, confirmed the status of these findings related to programs audited in the current year. Furthermore, federal entities are supposed to issue management decisions regarding state agency corrective actions for any current year. Now I'm going to turn it over to Kurt, and he can provide a little bit more.
Thank you, Kurt Schlicker with Bailey. I'm a senior manager for the record. Again, thank you so much for allowing us to speak today and present. I did want to provide a little bit of context to the findings and maybe relate them to the prior year, because it's kind of hard to understand when we throw numbers like 40 findings or 33 findings, what that actually means. Unfortunately, last year, the requirements and the audit requirements sort of changed, and we were required to audit less. And that was through direction and from the Office of Management and Budget that the president had sent out a directive. So you can't necessarily take a one-to-one comparison to the prior year, because we weren't necessarily auditing the same amount of requirements. But I would like to highlight a couple of things where it is sort of apples to apples. This year, we did report 9 material non-compliances. That is what we consider the most severe findings, meaning that the agencies did not materially comply with the regulations of the grant. Of those 9 material non-compliances, 5 were newly reported this year, and 4 were repeats from the prior year. If we look at the prior year report, we had 22 material non-compliances. So it seems like there's a significant improvement, but again, that's a little misleading because of the change in audit requirements that we were required to audit last year. So to put it in more context, we have to follow up on prior year findings. And of the 22 prior year material non-compliances, 14 were not corrected, and 8 of the 22 were corrected. So really only about a 1/3 correction rate on material non-compliances. A continuing theme for the last couple of years are the areas of material non-compliance, or where the state historically struggles with compliance. And those 2 finding areas really are procurement suspension and debarment and subrecipient monitoring. Of the 33 current year findings, 7 of them were related to subrecipient monitoring. 4 of them were related to procurement suspension and debarment. And as I just mentioned, on those 14 findings from 2018 that were not corrected, 7 of those related to procurement suspension and debarment, and 5 of those related to subrecipient monitoring. So it's really subrecipient monitoring and procurement suspension and debarment that continue to be the 2 hardest compliance areas for state agencies to comply with. And that has been kind of the historical trend over the last couple of years. We are, as Dan Crossman mentioned earlier and Tammy mentioned, we are available for any questions that you may have. And I know that it's kind of hard to digest all of these findings. So we appreciate and welcome any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Schlicker. I'd like to, at this point, turn it over to committee members to see if any members have any questions for either Ms. Miramontes or Mr. Schlicker.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I do, if I may.
Yes, Assemblywoman Carlton, please.
Thank you. So the comment that was made that piqued my interest was that we're not looking at the same things, so it's going to be hard to do a comparison because of the change in requirements at, I believe you said, the GAO level. So what don't we know now? What did we not look at? I think I need to understand what the changes were so that we know what we're really not looking at anymore, so that if we need to look at it or figure out what's going on, we can do that. I'm a little concerned about, I've always found it very helpful to be able to compare from year to year to year so that we can see where we are. And now that it's changed, we're going to have to figure out how to adjust for that. So I hope that question made some sense.
Yes, it does. Again, Kurt Schlicker with Ide Bailey for the record, through the chair to Assemblywoman Carlton. Yeah, well, not unfortunately, but what happened is in previous years prior to 2019, auditors were required to do kind of a materiality determination on what compliance requirements we would audit. So we would look at the federal guidelines and then break them into compliance requirements. And to put in perspective, there's 12 compliance requirements for big buckets that each grant may have. On average, somewhere to 7 to 10 compliance requirements are applicable to any one grant. Last year in 2019, that was mandated to audit a maximum of 6 requirements. And that mandate was pushed by President Trump, and then the federal agencies carried it out and then dictated which 6 compliance requirements they wanted auditors to look at. So we followed federal agency mandate or guidance on which 6 requirements to look at. And so many requirements we did not look at in the scope of the current year audit, but if they had a prior year finding from say 2018, we were required to follow up on the status of that prior year finding. So in the hard copy of the single audit report in that blue section in the back, that's where what's called the status of prior year findings. And then we verify, so to speak, what the state's response is on those prior year findings. And so, like I said, there was 22 material non-compliances in 2018, and 14 of those were not corrected, but we only reported 4 repeat material non-compliances, and that's simply because we didn't audit those same compliance requirements in the current year as due to federal mandate. It's not that we didn't want to or didn't need to. It was that literally the federal agency said do not look at these compliance requirements. Now, to be fair, federal agencies picked which requirements they thought was most important or requirements that they may look at themselves. So if OIG comes out and does an audit, they may focus on certain compliance requirements and maybe not rely on an external auditor to look at anymore. So that is unknown though, and I don't really have the answer to to that if they choose to do that.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may follow up then. So it's my understanding then that the current administration is requiring less accountability and less auditing. Therefore, if the state wants to make sure that we're looking at things and things are getting done, that responsibility will fall to us to do those evaluations and make sure that those dollars are where they're supposed to be.
Again, Kurt Schlicker for the record, through the chair to Assemblywoman Carlton. The mandate was down to 6 requirements, and that was what the current administration asked for. I don't have an answer of whether or not federal auditors from the Office of Inspector General will look at those other requirements. Some agencies may choose to do so in their, follow-up and audits of states and local governments, but in a big picture, yes, there is some more onus on the state to monitor their own compliance as well.
So the federal government is sending money out to the state, requiring less accountability. That's just not a very good equation as far as I'm concerned. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Carlton. Are there further questions from members of the committee? Okay, not seeing any. In that case, at this point, we'll accept a motion to approve the report. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Motion by Assemblywoman Carlton. Yeah. Old habits die hard. I'm sorry. And do we have a second?
Second, Senator Gorgachia.
Thank you. It's a second from Senator Gokachia. Discussion on the motion? Okay, not hearing any. I'd like to ask Mr. Crossman to take a roll call.
Senator Brooks,
Yes.
Senator Goycochea,
Yes.
Chair Parks,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson,
Yes.
and Assemblywoman Carlton.
Yes.
Thank you. That motion passes. I'd like to express my appreciation to both Ms. Miramontes and Mr. Schlicker for their presentation today. Thank you very much for your service. Okay, that concludes item number 4A. I'd like to proceed on to item number 4B, and that is a review of the Public Employees Benefit Program Contract Management. And I'd like to, at this time, turn it over to, I believe, Mr. Thorne and Mr. Peterson.
Good morning, Chair, committee members. For the record, I am James Thorne, Deputy Legislative Auditor. Beginning on page 1 and continuing through page 4, we provide background information on the Public Employees Benefits Program, including the agency's mission, membership, main service, contracts and amounts, a summary of revenues and expenditures, and reserve levels. On page 5, we state our audit scope and objective. The objective of this audit was to determine if Peb had adequate controls to ensure vendor selection and payment activities complied with state laws, policies, and contract terms, and expenses related to awards and accreditations were appropriate. The audit findings began on page 6. Peb's contracting practices changed over the past several years, focusing more on amending and extending contracts through private negotiations instead of competitive procurements. Between fiscal years 2015 and 2019, Peb authorized nearly $96 million in contract services that were not competitively bid through a request for proposal RFP process. On page 7 and Exhibit 5 on page 8, we note that 14 of 19 active service contracts in fiscal year 2019 had been extended. As a result, the average contract term increased from almost 5.5 years to over 8.5 years, with 2 contracts having 11-year terms. However, state policy indicates contracts should be competitively solicited at least every 4 years. Competitive solicitation helps ensure fair competition and that the selected vendor is in the best interest of the state. Exhibit 6 on page 9 shows Peb contracting activities between fiscal years 2009 and 2019. The exhibit shows that for the first 6 years, no contract extensions were performed and 21 competitive bids took place through an RFP process. However, under Peb's management over the past 5 years, 23 contract extensions were performed and only 12 competitive bids took place. While Peb claims a longer contract term is more desirable for some contracts, amending and extending contracts indefinitely does not help ensure the state and Peb participants receive the best value. Page 10 discusses how private negotiations became a standard practice as Peb's management extended vendor contracts for multiple years. As noted in Exhibit 7 on page 10, negotiations for one contract included 2 vendor-paid trips at the request of Peb management, in which Peb employees received transportation, lodging, and meals in excess of $7,000. As mentioned on page 11, both ethics laws and executive order, which was adopted by Peb in 2014, prohibit Peb employees from accepting gifts, including services such as transportation, travel, lodgings, and meals. Following the second trip, a significant scope modification occurred that the contract was extended 2 years. Ethics laws were known to Peb management as they reported a former employee for accepting a gift from a vendor valued at $282. When agencies' employees accept gifts from vendors, the potential exists for impropriety or the appearance of impropriety to be present within the agency and increases the risk that decisions made by management will not be in the best interest of the state. On pages 12 and 13 and in Exhibit 8, we note that Peb management claimed that competitive bidding for contracts was unnecessary, as they performed regular market checks to determine the value of the services their current vendors were providing. Market checks compared Peb's vendor services and pricing to other vendors for which Peb's actuary had information. However, market checks were only performed multiple years for one vendor and showed Peb was paying more than other plans of similar size. In addition, Peb management stated that market checks helped to negotiate better rates, but the following year's market check again showed Peb continued to pay more by up to $2.3 million. While market checks could provide insight in determining the value of current service contracts, they do not take the place of competitive bidding, especially when limited in scope and not performed regularly. In addition to market checks, Peb often cited cost savings as a reason for extending contracts, as discussed on page 13. However, the analysis for cost savings were often limited and not comprehensive. The agency's contracting practices have allowed for private negotiations that have led to contracts with higher costs and rates that are not easily defined. Furthermore, when a contract management process lacks competition, it gives preferential treatment to some vendors and makes it difficult to determine if the state and Peb participants receive the best services at the best prices. On page 14 and 15, we note state law designates the Peb board as the governing body responsible for the agency's contracting practices and use of agency resources. On page 16, we note 2 occasions in which Peb significantly modified existing contracts, bypassing competitive solicitation requirements for new services. This included extending a contract for 2 years and amending the contract so a vendor could newly create a platform that would offer voluntary products to participate in exchange for the vendor collecting commissions. On a separate occasion, Peb extended its third-party administration contract for 2 years and included a $2.5 million work order that was vaguely defined in the contract as a cost-saving strategy initiative. Peb used the work order to enter into 2 unapproved contracts. The first contract included a $100,000 maximum for a specialty care management nurse, while the second contract included a $480,000 maximum 3-year contract for the creation of a computer application that would allow Peb members to research the cost of medical procedures from different medical providers. When contract amendments significantly modify the original scope of work, other vendors are denied the opportunity to compete and offer different solutions and pricing, helping ensure the state obtains the best value. Exhibits 9 on page 18 shows that for 6 of 18 contract extensions tested, Peb did not receive proper approvals. This included 4 out of 18 contract extensions that took place without a contract extension waiver and state purchasing's approval, thereby violating state law. In addition, 2 of 18 contract extensions took place without being discussed by Peb's board, thereby circumventing state laws. Furthermore, on page 19, the board had approved contract amendments without supporting documentation to validate statements made by Peb management. We observed Peb management provided statements to its board that negatively portrayed the competitive bidding process, indicating that bidding was too costly, of little value, or state risked paying more with a new vendor. In recent years, the board approved modification to Peb's policies and procedures, placing less emphasis on competitive procurement and board oversight as discussed on page 20 and 21. For example, in September 2015, Peb management brought forward policy changes that removed the first step in contracting practices that required the agency develop an RFP when a contract is scheduled to expire or a new service is required. In place of this process, the policy changes required Peb staff to create a list of contracts scheduled to expire and provide the board with recommendations for extensions to existing contracts. As shown in Exhibit 10 on page 21, we observed some agency expenditures were unnecessary and not an efficient use of agency resources. For instance, Peb had allocated over 620 hours and nearly $51,000 to obtain business awards and an accreditation. State law establishes the expectation that Peb's funds be used for costs related to healthcare and agency operations for NRS 287.0434 Section 1. Furthermore, it is the responsibility of Peb's board and management to ensure funds are spent appropriately. Page 23 contains 4 recommendations to improve the agency's contracting practices and 1 recommendation regarding better oversight for expenditures. On page 24 through 26, we describe our audit methodology. The agency's response to the audit report begins on page 27. Then on page 30, we list the audit recommendations and show the division accepted all 5 recommendations. On page 31, we provide our comments on the agency's response to highlight our concerns with the vendor paid travel. This concludes the audit presentation. We're available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thorne. Appreciate that presentation. I'd like to at this time open it up to the members of the committee to any questions they may have for audit staff.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, thank you. Assemblywoman Carlton, please.
Thank you.
Go on. Yeah.
I guess my question is, how did we miss this? How did they get around just extending contracts and having that go? And somehow I feel bad because I've been on this committee for a while and I've chaired the Interim Retirements and Benefits Committee. How did we miss this? And what do we need to do to make sure that extending these contracts doesn't keep happening? Was this simply a function of the board and we just didn't know? What do we need to do to make sure that they're in compliance in the future?
Chairman Parks, through you, James Thorne for the record. I think there were some leadership changes that had occurred within Peb, as we had noted. When I think it's let me share the exhibit number here real quick. But in one of the exhibits, we kind of show that there's a change. This is exhibit 6 on page 9. We kind of show a change. There was a change in leadership that took place, which kind of led to a culture change. And then again, on page 20 of the report, we talk about policy changes that were implemented and approved by the board. And I would say in the board's defense, a lot of the reasoning provided to the board by Peb management indicated, that it would be preferable to extend contracts because of the burden and the difficulty of getting a new vendor on board. And so I think that over time, the board may have accepted this as kind of the way they were doing things. However, if you'd like, you could ask Peb what they think about what might have occurred that transpired over that time. Thank you.
And I appreciate that, but I think we need to know what we need to do, especially like at the Interim Retirements and Benefits Committee level. Is there I'd like a recommendation from you, and not at this moment, you guys could come up with something for us, but I think that committee somehow needs to be aware of these things because that's part of what's going on there. And these benefits are very important to state employees. I mean, And the fact that this happened, state employees may have been very misserved. And somehow the ball was hidden from us on this. So I think it would be very important for us to make sure that that committee has the information, because this happened in 15, 16, 17. We could have stopped this in the 17 session. I mean, if they got away with it in 15, if we'd have known in 17, we could have adjusted, and then those last couple of years, there wouldn't have been as much harm. So I think I'd like to make sure that that other committee has the resources it needs to catch these types of things. Because to me, this is beyond unethical, what they did. I mean, we can't even have a cup of coffee with somebody, but yet they took trips. So won't go into consequences right now. This isn't the appropriate place, but that's what I'd like to understand in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Carlton. Is there any response from Mr. Thorne regarding the last question from Assemblywoman Carlton?
Mr. Chairman, James Thorne for the record. I would say that I guess using state purchasing as an ally, always being able to refer to them if there's ever concerns regarding contracting issues, as well as NRS 333, which lists the procurement laws and purchasing laws, as well as contracting practices. Also, the recommendations listed in this report do offer some solutions to kind of having better policies and procedures for addressing some of these things. And if there's anything further you need, please let me know.
Thank you, Mr. Thorne. I appreciate it. I believe Vice Chair Benitez Thompson, please.
Thank you so much. And so my question is kind of along in the same lines that the recommendations I very much appreciate, but they kind of come back to that self-governance aspect that the board that the agency needs to develop more policies. And then hopefully, those policies will be forward and are followed, and obviously we'll bird dog this for a little bit. We have lots of NRS that they're supposed to be following. I don't know that it's necessarily we need more laws. I think it's on page 15. You outline not only the NRS 333 on purchasing that's supposed to be followed, but the 287 stuff, state administrative manual. So I feel like we've got lots of the policy, lots of the words on paper that talk about how compliance should happen. And I'm just wondering, from previous audits where we saw, lots of level of oversights that weren't really getting to address the problem, did you see other type of recommendations that were more effective in kind of getting sunshine in?
For the record, Todd Peterson, Audit Supervisor, Chair Parks, through you. In prior audits, we don't at all times see like a governing body, like Peb has a board. Recommendations in other audits are made towards strengthening either the policies and procedures of the agency, or when applicable, requesting changes to state law to help tighten up the oversight of an agency. In this case, I think with the Public Employees Benefits Program, you have a board, and training on their part and the ability for them to question the actions of the agency would go a long ways to helping resolve these issues. I think too, for the board members to have that critical eye, that professional skepticism when contracts or amendments are presented to them, not only asking questions, but once they receive responses from agency management, but to question those and to require supporting documentation for the positions taken by the agency so that they can ensure, one, that they're in compliance with state laws and policies, but then also the best interests of the state, that these actions are being taken for the best interests of the state. I hope that answers your question.
If I could follow up, when you, the recommendation here where you talk about the periodic training for the board members and employees, I think that's good. Would you say that your office would be equipped to handle that? I almost think that I see within, I think it needs to be kind of someone with a more, a kind of that audit eye, because I see how the conversations go with the board and with staff, and you know, when they have the conversations where the board does say, hey, aren't we supposed to do an RFP? We should probably be doing an RFP. And they've got, you know, really smart, astute, educated people on the board, and they seem to, when they know to ask the questions, when they know there's a contract up, they seem to be asking the right questions. But then, you know, staff will say, well, it's just too expensive to do that. It's, you know, and you've got staff really guiding the board in a direction to say, do not, you know, it's just going to be way too expensive for those pharmacy benefit managers to submit an RFP process. You know, they don't have the money for that, or they don't have, you know, the, you know, exchange providers might not have the money to do an RFP process, which is kind of almost comical in a way. But it would, when we talk about that training, could that be something that you folks would do? Or is there, I don't think it's a one-time PowerPoint for them to kind of, to do this. What, can I just get your thoughts? I know your office does a lot. I'm not necessarily suggesting you say, yeah, we'll do that, but I'm just, can you give some suggestions that when we say training, how we could get more, a little bit more specific as to who the best, who best might provide that kind of training at a level that's really meaningful?
Sure. For the record, Todd Peterson, Chair Parks, through you to Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson. We're always happy to help. I don't want to speak for the legislative auditor, but we're happy to help where we can. There's also wonderful resources available. You know, we have a state purchasing that has professionals that you know, teach classes on contracting and the requirements, and so they're a wonderful resource. We have the, you know, governor's finance office with their internal audit and that function. So there's many resources available in the state. Also, I know Peb has a position for a contract manager that I believe that contract manager has to be certified and trained every few years through state purchasing. So the answer is yes, there's many resources, and I think we would be glad to help out where we can.
Mr. Chair, can I just, oh, sorry.
One last follow-up on that is, and I think this distinction here is important, as I was reading the report, do you think that it was a naiveness of these laws, or I see more evidence that it was a workaround of the laws, which I guess when I'm asking these questions about how you train for compliance, I don't necessarily see a lack of knowledge. I see intentional non-compliance.
Sure. For the record, Todd Peterson, Audit Supervisor, Chairman through you to the Assemblywoman. In my opinion, you know, a lot of times we follow the path of least resistance. You know, if agency management, I don't want to speak for agency management, but you know, they felt like they were able to get a reasonable price for the services performed, and do it without having to go through some of the effort of soliciting proposals and evaluating those. That could be part of the reason behind why things didn't follow the required path. And then as far as the board, once again, I don't want to speak for them, but I think they put a great bit of trust in the agency and within the management. And we did see as part of our audit work, as we reviewed board minutes, we see the board asking some wonderful questions. And as they received answers from management, sometimes those answers were they were long. They provided information. They didn't provide documentation that necessarily supported what was being said. But so I think the board put their trust in management, and after a while felt after things were done, time and time again, it was just kind of accepted as the way things were allowed to be done and what was acceptable. That became the thought, I believe.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Mr.
Senator
Thorne,
Gord-
I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Senator Gokachia, please.
Oh, thank you. I just got a couple of questions, and clearly, I assume the Peb board is a bonded board, you know, and yeah, we're seeing evidence here that intentionally or not, they did skirt, you know, pieces of NRS. The board has the authority, and ultimately, the fault lies with them. And I think that is what we need to really impress on the board, and the fact that they do have the culpability and the liability. Any comments?
Yeah. Mr. Peterson, any thoughts there?
For the record, Todd Peterson, through you, Chair, to Senator Gokachia. As mentioned in the audit report, we do highlight that you're correct, Senator, that the board is the governing body, and through statute, there's been a lot of authority and responsibility placed with them. So it's an important board. There's some important decisions that are made there. And so absolutely they need to take that responsibility seriously, which I believe they do. And with the proper amount of training, they can be very effective.
Just a quick follow-up. Technically, I assume the penalties that would be imposed on this board would be through the Ethics Commission?
For the record, Todd Peterson, through you, Chair, to Senator Gokachia. As far as contracting, I'm not aware of any penalties if that would be applicable. Is that the Ethics Commission would impose. The Ethics Commission, I believe, would be responsible for overseeing and enforcing any violations of the ethics laws.
All right, thank you. So technically, they're responsible, but we really don't know who's going to provide the oversight to them as well. And maybe that's something we need to look at.
Thank you, Senator Gokachia, and thank you, Mr. Peterson. I think that we probably have comments and questions for the executive officer when we invite her forward. I have a couple observations, and that is that I guess as I'm reading the report, I'm kind of reading a little behind between the lines. And on page 14, you make emphasis of the fact that the Peb board needs to enhance oversight of the agency. But as I read the report, I get a strong sense that the previous executive officer ran wide and loose on this whole dealing, especially with that of especially the extensions. So maybe we could find out a little more about that. I did have one technical question, however, and that is as far as the extensions go, is there a procedure or policy in place at this time that any and all extensions must go through purchasing? It would seem that that would rectify some of the findings that were provided. So if I could get an answer to that regarding Peb's policies and procedures requiring state purchasing to approve any contract extensions.
Mr. Chair, James Thorne for the record. Yes, that's correct. There is policies and procedures that require that you go through state purchasing when you're going to do a contract extension. They have a contract extension justification waiver in which the agency would complete and submit to state purchasing. And then state purchasing, giving their reasoning, would then make a decision or determination on whether or not they could approve the extension or deny the extension. Then I believe it goes to the Governor's Office of Finance and Policy, and they usually do the checks where they determine whether or not they did go through state purchasing on an extension prior to going through the Board of Examiners.
Thank you, Mr. Thorne. I think I have one final question, and if there's any other committee members wishing to ask questions, that's fine too. On page 21, you make reference to unnecessary expenditures, and I don't know if I fully understand. At the very bottom of page 21, it makes reference to American Business Awards and Stevie Awards. Could you just give me a brief explanation of what these awards are and how they function? Are they awards for outstanding work by employees, or how does that work? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, James Thorne for the record. I'll probably defer that question to the agency as they are a little bit more familiar with the business awards. However, what we looked at was that they had won awards for innovation, and that they had gotten the Stevie Award. They had applied for it, I believe, twice and gotten it twice. But the details as far as how they got into that and the different kinds of awards that they could apply for, they would probably be better suited to answer that question.
Thank you, Mr. Thorne. I'll ask that for the agency. Okay, at this point, I'd like to ask if any of the committee members have any further questions for either Mr. Thorne or Mr. Peterson. Okay, I'm not seeing any. Once again, thank you, Mr. Thorne and Mr. Peterson, for your presentation. At this time, I'd like to open it up for I believe the executive officer, Ms. Rich from Peb.
Thank you, Chair Parks and members of the committee. For the record, I am Laura Rich, the Executive Officer of the Public Employees Benefits Program. First, I would like to thank Dan Crossman and his team of auditors. Peb has had the pleasure of hosting their audit team through these last 2 audits. And although it's never fun to be on the receiving end of an audit, we have found that the process is a very valuable learning experience. So due to COVID, it's been many months since Peb first submitted its findings response. So instead of reiterating the written response, I thought the committee would find it more valuable to hear the more recent updates. So the first thing I would like to point out is that Peb has experienced significant changes in leadership since the audit was performed. I was appointed the executive officer in March after the previous executive officer resigned in January. And around that same time, we had a new chair that was appointed to the board as well as several changes among the board appointments as well. So the first finding has to do with the Peb board and ensuring that they're more involved in the contracting process. Peb currently has 6 major contracts expiring, and all of these contracts are either out to bid now or will be going out to bid soon. Board members have been heavily involved in the development of the request for proposals, so the RFPs, and they are also serving as evaluators on all the evaluation teams. So in addition, there will be an agenda item on the next board meeting to address the recommended policy and procedure changes as well. So I think we're making some progress there. I do also want to add that, as I believe James Thorne said, that all these contract extensions and any contract in general does have oversight. It has to be approved by the purchasing division, also by the governor's finance office and the board of examiners as well. So, there is oversight. All of the contract extensions at the time did go through those processes. So I just wanted to make that clear as well. So the second finding, I won't lie, it's concerning. The auditors had a concern regarding 2 instances when an existing vendor paid for transportation and lodging for Peb staff to travel to their Toronto headquarters location in January of 2017. And the audit finding refers to this as a violation of the gifting policy. So in addition to what was provided in the written response for this finding, I do want to add that Peb did get subsequent information from the Commission on Ethics, who, while they cannot issue a formal finding without a formal investigation, both the auditors and Peb presented them with very similar information, and based on what they were given, they did say that there is precedence for agencies to have vendors purchase travel or pay for the travel versus having the agency pay for the travel in certain circumstances. I also do want to add that, yes, it's very concerning that there was a contract extension that came after that, and the perception is just as important as anything else here. And I do want to say that contract extension back in March was canceled by the board. There was a recommendation by staff to cancel it based on poor performance, and they will, so that bid is, or that contract is now out for solicitation today. So that contract extension was canceled by the board and is no longer in effect today. I do also want to add that this will be an agenda item at the Peb September board meeting. We will be presenting these items to the board. I will be making the recommendation based on these audit findings to possibly form a subcommittee by the board to then establish more in-depth policies and procedures for the board and also internally for Peb staff as well. So with that, I'll leave it at that, and I am available for any questions that the committee members may have.
Thank you, Ms. Rich, for that presentation. I think at this point, I'll open it up for questions from committee members. Assemblywoman Carlton, did you wish to follow up on your previous questions to the auditor?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I'm not sure if I heard everything correctly. It froze and came back in and out a couple times. So I apologize if I'm asking you to repeat. So my question is really more around the ethics part of this thing and what the consequences are going to be. Did I hear you say correctly that the ethics folks didn't think there was an issue with this and there was no complaint filed? So we're not holding this person accountable for this behavior?
For the record, Laura Rich, thank you for the question. The Ethics Commission, in order to issue a formal finding, must do a formal investigation. So there has to be a request made to do a formal investigation on any potential ethics violation. But I believe the auditing team, as well as myself, actually reached out to the Commission on Ethics director and presented them with the information that was available. And I believe it sounds like we presented them with the same information. Based on the information that was presented, the Ethics Commission did say that there is precedence. There are times especially during a recession or when an agency maybe doesn't have sufficient funding, where it has been deemed appropriate for that agency or the vendor to pay for the agency's staff to travel to, either let's say it's some kind of convention or a training opportunity or something of that nature. And so there is precedence to show that the vendors paying for travel and lodging is appropriate. In this situation, the first instance of travel was for the executive officer at the time to travel to the Toronto headquarters location. We had a poor performing vendor, and there was an opportunity to find a resolution to improve performance. And so that was
rather than go through, thank you. I don't want to belabor this any longer. So it's my understanding that no complaint was actually filed. A conversation was had, but if an actual complaint was filed, then there would be a much more thorough investigation, and it wouldn't be just a superficial glance at the activities with the response that, oh, it might be okay, but no one actually asked for an investigation on these behaviors.
For the record, Laura Rich, no. There was that, to my knowledge, there was no investigation.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, that's what
For the
gives me,
record.
I do believe an investigation should have been requested. Just asking the Ethics Commission for just an opinion on something without them having all the data and going in and really investigating might not be giving us the answer that we really need. So that's my concern, is no actual real investigation was had. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Carlton. I share your concerns. Are there further questions of Ms. Rich from members of the committee? Okay, at this time, I'm not seeing any. I guess I share the same concern that Assemblywoman Carlton had, and as I was reading the report, I couldn't help but ask myself repeatedly whether or not these activities rise to the level of a fraudulent activity, and I concur with Assemblywoman Carlton that maybe we should have looked further on that.
Senator Goycochea, just a
Yes,
point of
Senator Goycochea, please.
Thank you. And I just want to make sure, in talking to Ms. Rich, that again, these extensions and these waivers were in fact approved by state purchasing, the governor's office and the Board of Examiners, even though this occurred last year, to your knowledge.
For the record, Laura Rich, yes, all of these contracts were approved not only by the board, but through the purchasing division, the governor's finance office, and Board of Examiners. The one thing I do want to add, and it is a suggestion that I will likely make to the board, is Peb undergoes a compliance check every 2 years. This is where we have an outside team look at all of our processes and practices to ensure that we are meeting all federal and state rules, regulations, laws. And I believe that we can probably add contracts to this compliance review as well, just to ensure that we have just another layer of oversight in the future.
Mr. Chairman, for the record,
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I comment? This is Laura Freed for the record.
Oh,
I serve as the Director of the Department of Administration, and I also serve as the Peb Board Chair. I was appointed in January. And so I find myself in a strange position because I came into this audit as in my previous job, which was a budget officer in the governor's finance office. And prior to being the governor's finance office, I used to work at LCB Fiscal. So I've been tracking the Peb budgets for a long time on the analyst side, and now I'm the board chair. And so I've watched some of these things and some of the contracts that your audit staff had asked staff in the GFO, as well as staff at LCB, about were contracts that I viewed, contract amendments that I viewed in my previous job. And so I wanted to underscore a couple things. First off, yes, both Executive Officer Rich and your staff are absolutely correct. A contract amendment has to, if it's beyond a 4-year term, the agency has to fill out a request to extend the contract and convince the purchasing administrator that this is a good idea rather than going back up to bid. Then that contract amendment, depending on the dollar value, it always goes to the GFO, and it could be either a clerk of the board signed by the GFO analyst, or it could go to the full board of examiners. In some cases, there were concerns raised by staff at the GFO about the substance and the scope changes in some of the contract amendments. They were ultimately approved. So in listening to some of the earlier testimony, what caught my ear was, does the board take this seriously? Well, given my background, yes, as the board chair, I take this very seriously. As Ms. Rich said, we have, I believe, 6 RFPs running, and so all of the board members are engaged in reviewing RFP responses right now for major vendor contracts. We are not going to do this in the future. As the board chair, if it would have to be a very compelling reason to extend a contract past 4 years without rebidding it. And I will certainly, as the chair, be mindful of scope changes that substantially change the purpose of the original contract. And the only other thing I would say is that, first of all, to Ms. Rich's comment from a moment ago about adding contracts to compliance training, we will be doing that. If you are an employee in the executive branch who handles contracts, you have to go through a certified contract manager class provided by the purchasing division. The folks on the board aren't all people like me. They aren't all fiscal types. There's only one who's really fiscally oriented. The rest are, they're pharmacists, they're hearings officers, folks like that. And so they don't necessarily swim in those waters. So I think it's a good thing to do. Also, yes, there will be tweaks to the board's policies and procedures to limit the flexibility of the executive officer to amend contracts sort of administratively. But I did anyway. So all that said, I just wanted to reassure this body that the Peb board understands its fiduciary duty, its duty to its participants, and we will do better in the future. And certainly I, as the chair, will be officially skeptical of staff coming to tell me when they think a contract needs to be amended. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Freed. Appreciate those comments. I'd like to circle back to Senator Gokachia to find out if his questions were satisfactorily answered?
Yes, I'm fine at this time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
To Ms. Rich, did you wish to make any further comments? I think we sort of cut you off.
No, the only thing I did want to add for the record, Laura Rich, there was a question regarding the Stevie Awards and the URAC accreditation. The URAC accreditation, I do want to say that it does expire in 2021, and that will not be renewed. The Stevie Awards, that was, again, the previous executive officer. There was I guess, a desire to maybe go up against the private sector to see, you know, how well our agency is doing compared to, you know, some of these other agents or these other organizations in the private sector. And so it was just I guess, a chance to illustrate how well our agency was doing and to compete against the private sector to, you know, to show the innovation that our agency was, you know, was really taking on. We will not be doing that in the future. But that was just a question that I know came up, so I just wanted to add that in there.
Thank you, Ms. Rich, for that clarification. Once again, back to the members of the committee. Any further questions from the members of the committee? Okay, I'm not seeing any. So what I'd like to do is once again thank Mr. Thorne, Mr. Peterson, Ms. Rich, and Ms. Freed for commenting on this report. And if there are no further questions, I'll go ahead and accept a motion to approve the report.
I would move to accept the report. It's what it is, and it states.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion from Senator Gokachia. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, second from Vice Chair Benitez Thompson. Thank you. Mr. Crossman, would you kindly do roll call?
Senator Brooks,
Oh, Mr. Chairman, before you do roll call.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just under the motion, I want to make sure it's perfectly clear because we had brought up timeframes earlier, that this all began in 2015 and went all the way through 2019. So this isn't a recent problem. This problem started in 2015. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear and on the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Carlton. Yes, I appreciate that comment. Thank you. So once again, I'll turn it over to Mr. Crossman to do a roll call.
Senator Brooks,
Yes.
Senator Goycochea,
Yes.
Chair Parks,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson,
Yes.
and Assemblywoman Carlton.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Crossman. Motion passes. Okay, that concludes item 4B, and I'd like to proceed. Excuse me. I'd like to proceed on to item 4C, which is the Department of Business and Industry. Excuse me, the Real Estate Division. I believe we have presentations by Ms. Humlick and Mr. Peterson.
Good morning, Chair Parks and members of the Audit Subcommittee. For the record, my name is Katrina Humlick, Deputy Legislative Auditor, and I'm here today to present our audit of the Real Estate Division. Beginning at page 1 and continuing through page 3, we provide background information on the Real Estate Division, including the agency's mission, staffing levels, and financial information. At the bottom of page 3, we state our audit objectives were to determine whether the division's financial and administrative controls over the collection of certain cash receipts and accounts receivable are adequate, and to determine if the division has adequate processes to ensure licensees comply with laws related to reporting requirements for broker trust accounts. We conduct our audits in accordance with government auditing standards, and these standards require us to report any constraints imposed on the audit approach and limitations on access to information, which we discuss on pages 4 and 5 of the report. These limitations included a lack of adequate records for voided transactions and an inability of the database vendor to provide a report showing transfers of funds between licensees' accounts. However, we do not believe these limitations impacted our audit objectives or affected our conclusions because of other procedures performed. Our findings begin on page 6. The division's financial and administrative controls over revenues are inadequate. As stated at the bottom of page 6, controls over voiding cash receipts and for making other adjustments to real estate licensees' accounts within the division's database are not adequate. Specifically, there is no segregation of duties within the database, thereby allowing employees to add or delete revenues from an account without any record of the edits to the account. In addition, the system allows users to void receipts days, months, and even years after the original transaction occurred. For example, in fiscal year 2019, the average number of days between the original transaction date and the date a receipt was voided was 38 days, with the longest being 2,884 days, or nearly 8 years after the original transaction occurred. These weaknesses leave the division susceptible to fraud and other errors. In fiscal year 2019, there were over 3,000 voided transactions totaling over $1.62 million. Exhibit 3 on page 7 shows the total number of voided transactions over the last 3 fiscal years and the total dollar amount voided. Additionally, we observed the division's written procedures that includes a control to help detect fraudulently voided transactions is not being followed. Voided receipts must be printed out with a reason for the void documented on the receipt, which should be reviewed by a supervisor. However, in our testing of 25 front counter voided transactions, only one of the voided receipts was printed out, but a supervisor's review was not noted on the receipt. Continuing to page 9, we found that the division lacks controls to ensure refunds are posted timely to its database, and that only valid refunds are posted and issued. Amounts shown as refunded in the division's database were not processed in the state accounting system. In addition, refunded amounts that had been issued in the state accounting system were not posted timely in the division's database. For instance, in fiscal year 2019, the division posted 200 refunds in its database totaling $41,500. The average number of days between a refund check being issued from the state accounting system and the refund being entered into the division's database was 140 days. The longest refund examined took nearly 7 years to be posted in the database after the check was already issued. We also observed some refunds posted in the database were invalid, as amounts were never refunded in the state accounting system. Without adequate controls over refunds, there is a higher risk of refunds being duplicated or that credits in the system could be used to conceal theft. In addition to inadequate controls over both voids and refunds, the division does not perform an effective reconciliation of revenues received, deposited, and recorded in its database. A reconciliation is only performed at the time of the deposit. Thus, any voids or transfers between budget accounts in the database after the deposit are not reconciled to what is in the state accounting system. Page 10 contains 6 recommendations to improve oversight and controls over cash receipts. Continuing on page 11, our audit found the division's monitoring of broker trust accounts to be ineffective. Specifically, the division's current practice only holds brokers that hold a property manager permit accountable for submitting trust account information annually, even though regulation requires all brokers to report trust account information or attest that they do not manage trust accounts. Brokers who are property managers are less than half of the broker population within the state, but are the only ones being held accountable for reporting by the division. In a survey sent to randomly selected brokers without property manager permits, we received 35 responses, of which 25 brokers did not file anything with the division for fiscal year 2019. None of these 25 brokers were fined by the division for non-compliance. In contrast, we tested 25 brokers with active property manager permits in fiscal year 2019 and observed 7 were fined because they did not file the appropriate trust account report. According to the division, it focuses on monitoring brokers that are property managers because they are most likely to have trust accounts. But our survey found there are brokers without a property manager permit who have trust accounts, and they are not being monitored or held accountable. Ensuring all brokers report trust account information would be equitable and help protect individuals' money held in broker trust accounts. Continuing on page 13, we found the division's procedures for monitoring trust accounts to be inadequate and ineffective. The division reviews trust account documents for several requirements in an attempt to discover any commingling of funds or embezzlement by brokers. However, for 13 of 19, or 68%, of brokers' trust account reconciliations tested, We observed the information reported to the division was incomplete or contained unallowed accounting entries. These included questionable items such as gift card purchases that were charged by brokers to their trust accounts, which were not addressed by the division. On one example, a broker submitted a trust account reconciliation with over $175,000 in unknown account holder balances that the division did not question. Without proper monitoring of trust accounts, individuals may be at risk from broker misconduct. At the bottom of page 14 and continuing to page 16, we found the division does not have an effective process to track broker trust accounts. Per Nevada Revised Statute 645.310.6, a broker must notify the division of the names of the banks and accounts for their trust accounts on a form provided by the division. However, the division relies on brokers to self-report their bank account information on the annual trust reconciliations, and this information is not compared from year to year. Consequently, the division is unaware of how many trust accounts each broker has, increasing the risk accounts will go unreported and unmonitored, leaving individuals' money vulnerable to fraud. Page 16 contains 6 recommendations to strengthen the division's regulation of broker trust accounts. Beginning on page 17, we found the division does not actively pursue collections of past due accounts and continues to have difficulty monitoring and submitting debt timely to the state controller, as similar problems were reported in our prior 2 audits. We tested 76 commission fines selected from the division's accounts receivable tracking spreadsheets and found that none of the debt holders received a past due notice at 30, 60, or 90 days. Additional testing of accounts receivable found untimely reporting has been a problem for many years. Our testing of 122 accounts submitted to the state controller for collection efforts over the last 5 fiscal years found the division's debt was submitted an average of 695 days or 1.9 years after the debt became 60 days past due. The longest in our sample took 2,452 days or 6.7 years for the debt to be submitted to the state controller. Although the Department of Business and Industry has taken over reporting the division's debt to the state controller, the division should ensure timely reporting of its past due accounts by the department. Exhibit 4 on page 19 shows the number of fines issued by the 3 commissions over the last 5 fiscal years. Exhibit 5 on page 20 shows the division's collection rate on these same fines issued by fiscal year. Continuing to the middle of page 20, we found that the accounts receivable amounts reported to the state controller are not accurate. For example, for 76 commission fines selected, we found 8 or 11% contained errors when we compared the amounts on the spreadsheet to the commission's order for the debt. For one fine, the amount on the tracking spreadsheet was $30,000, when the commission's order showed the fine was actually $300,000. Similarly, we compared the 122 commission fines sent for collection with the state controller and found 28 or 23% had amounts due in the division's database that did not agree with the state controller's records. These errors are concerning because if debt is not accurately tracked and correctly reported to the state controller, the debt holder could end up paying the incorrect amount or dispute the debt altogether. Page 22 contains 2 recommendations to improve collections of accounts receivable. Appendix A, starting at page 23, includes our audit methodology, and the division's response to the audit report begins on page 27. The division accepted all 14 audit recommendations. However, at Appendix C on page 33, we have included our comments on the division's response to reinforce our position on the importance of proper management of the broker trust fund process. Chair Parks and committee members, this concludes my presentation. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Humlick, for that presentation. I'd like to, at this time, open it up for committee members to, if they have any questions for Ms. Humlick. Let me also say that I guess out of disclosure, I should disclose that I am a real estate licensee through the department, the real estate division. However, I'm only a sales licensee, so none of the requirements related to trust funds would apply to me. Okay, questions from the committee? Yes, Vice Chair Benitez Thompson, please.
Thank you so much. I had a question on the recommendation number 13, where it talks that the department is coming up with a better process for debt collection and coordinating with the controller's office. I guess, could you tell us a little bit more about what that about what that looks like and what we might see coming from the division? I guess specifically, is it just policy? Does it seem to be software? Do we have an idea of what this looks like?
Katrina Humlick, for the record, Chair Parks, through you to Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson. I believe a lot of the problems stemmed from confusion and disconnect between the department and the division, and they are currently working on a joint policy and procedure on how to go about submitting debts to the controller's office, as well as who is going to be responsible for submitting the 30, 60, 90-day past due notices.
So kind of just more of a clear order of operation.
Katrina Humlick, for the record, correct. The division could probably answer more too.
Thank you, Vice Chair Benitez Thompson. Further questions from the committee? Okay. At this time, I want to thank Ms. Humlick for the presentation, as well as Mr. Peterson. And I'd like to, at this point, open it up for the staff of the administrator at the real estate division and the any other individuals who would like to speak on behalf of the agency.
Good morning, Chair Parks, members of the committee. This is Sharat Chandra, Administrator for the Real Estate Division. Again, just to start off, I want to thank Katrina, Todd. I think Chris was also a big part of the audit team, and Mr. Crossman. Again, they did an exceptional job, very professional. We try to be as accommodating as possible to ensure, again, bottom line is we want to get better from this. It was never going to be something that we would hide from. We just wanted to cooperate with them fully. So we appreciate the feedback. And I think the auditors went through a lot of these things without kind of belaboring the point. Some of these things are definitely concerning for us. And again, Senator Parks, you know the history of the division, and folks on this panel probably already know the history of the division. We are general funded, and so the challenge has always been trying to improve the customer service, also try to enhance the ability for the division to serve. But the internal controls as far as users in the database, I just want to point out it's a 14-year-old system that has kind of been patched together over time. So there is a need for an enhancement. As the auditors pointed out, even to get a report from the third-party vendor, they have to do a customization. So the challenge has always been for us is how do we pull the data that we want and make sure that we're kind of putting all these internal controls in place. What we've done is we've done a mapping of what everyone's controls are, internal controls are, and then we'll start working towards limiting certain transactions to the licensing section, their supervisor and the manager, thereby enhancing those constraints so that people are not voiding and moving transactions without certain verifications. Again, the big issue was the refunds. And we've already put in place a policy right around the time the audit was happening. This was something that we've done about the refund policy. I think it's an issue of the system and the paying of these refunds, and then how do we reconcile this? So we have a comprehensive policy in place, and I believe it addresses a lot of those. The trust accounts has always been a challenge. Again, the division has limited resources. And so what we've tried to do is focus on those trust account reconciliations that are part of those brokers that do property management. I think that has been always the big issue with the commission. Senator Parks, you probably can also see this in the industry. So that has been the focus, not necessarily because everyone may or may not have a trust account, but that is where the maximum amount of transactions happen. And that's where we've tried to focus. And again, we will hone in on certain recommendations and try to create a better structure. But at the end of the day, there's 40,000 licensees. 32,000 of them are real estate licensees. And so in order to maximize our impact, that is what we've decided to do. I know there are questions about, well, everyone has trust accounts, and I don't have a very good answer for it right now, but I will definitely put my mind to it and try to improve that process. But at the end of the day, that is where we see the problem, and that's where we're going to focus on our efforts. I think that's all I have. Again, with Assemblywoman Benita Thompson's question about working with business and industry and the division, we are definitely there. Deputy Administrator Buddy Malazzo is also on there just to lend us support. We will work as a department and a division to clean up those lines of communication, also work with the Controller's Office because he has some history there. So we'll try to bring all parties together and try to ensure that all of those things happen seamlessly. There has definitely been cracks and things have fallen through the cracks, and we will fix that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chandra. Appreciate that presentation. I guess I know that committee members will probably have questions, but I think one of the questions that comes to mind for me is you have 14 recommendations to implement, and I don't know how your staffing complement is and whether or not this is something, given the pandemic we're in the midst of, and how that is going to impact your ability to correct these recommendations. And if you have to provide any comment there, it'd certainly be appreciated.
Thank you, Senator Parks. Thank you for bringing that up. Again, the recommendations are all valid. As I look through them, what I did in my response is try to combine some of those recommendations because I think the auditors felt it was important to highlight them section by section. But in my understanding and looking at it a little globally, the trust account reconciliations is one pot, though it might be, auditing it, receiving it, documenting it. All those things for me fall into one big pot, and I'm going to address it as a whole. But again, the point that I made earlier, and to your points there too, is it's a balance between what I have, how much more can I stretch my already stretched staff, and also make sure that we are not creating unnecessary hurdles for the real estate industry, but also making sure that we definitely protect the public. And the focus has always been trust accounts, because that the property managers are where seems to be the weakest link. And we have increased our property management courses. We have increased the education, and I believe you know this from the last session. We increased continuing education, so that increases the education level for the property managers. There has been some discussions about actually having them bonded, so there's more protection. But again, those are still discussions. So those are the things that we are doing outside of just the audit. But the rest of it, sir, are essentially things that we can definitely work on. There is no reason why we can't work on this in spite of, the staff, the looming budget cuts, some of the vacancies that we currently have, and the fact that, we are resource constrained and a very antiquated and aging database. But those are not excuses, they're just facts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chandra. And have you received assurance from Mr. Malazzo that you would be getting department level support for your division?
Absolutely, sir, but I'll let him speak to that too. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Buddy Malazzo. Hello, good morning. Thank you.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you to all the auditors. You're welcome. We appreciate all the work they do. Auditing to me is just, a function of your job. I think audits are good because they show things sometimes where they get lax. It's not, a lot of times, people are doing things just negligently. It's that, slowly things start to slip between the cracks. So we definitely appreciate the audit. With the Department of Business and Industry, with the divisions, the fiscal is centralized and not within the units, the divisions themselves. So one thing we've committed to Sharath, is to have better lines of communication between the department and the division. The division has their accounting system that they use, which a lot of times and in many divisions doesn't tie into the state system. From a fiscal standpoint, your state fiscal person, we're concerned about the state's accounting system and how those transactions apply. And sometimes people miss the correlation between like a division's accounting system and record keeping and the states and departments. So we've absolutely committed to Sharath to have a better lines of communication with him and his staff and our fiscal staff. We've had discussions with the controller's office about better lines of communication. We did sign a memorandum of agreement, so we will work better with them. We have deadlines in that memorandum when stuff from our offices need to be turned over to them to give them the proper time, to vet it and do their job. So it is definitely our intent from the department standpoint to, work with Sharath and his team to accomplish his goals.
Senator Parks, I believe you're muted.
I'm sorry, I am muted. Thank you. I'd like at this time to thank you, Mr. Milazzo. I'd like to ask if committee members have any questions. Okay, I'm not seeing any. So we want to thank Mr. Chandra and Mr. Milazzo for their comments and responses, as well as to thank Ms. Humlick and Mr. Peterson for their work on this audit. At this time, I'd like to ask if take a motion to approve this report.
I'd like to make the motion to approve the report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Brooks. I believe we have a second from Vice Chair Benitez Thompson. Okay, any discussion on the motion? Mr. Crossman, would you please do roll call?
Senator Brooks?
Yes.
Senator Goycochea?
Yes.
Chair Parks?
Yes.
Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson?
Yes.
And Assemblywoman Carlton?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crossman. That motion passes. Okay. That concludes our item number 4C, Real Estate Division, and we'll move on to item number 4D, which is the Office of the State Treasurer, Unclaimed Property Program. And with that, I believe that we have a presentation by Eugene Alara and Tammy Getz.
Yes, good morning, Chairman Parks and committee members. For the record, my name is Eugene Alara, Deputy Legislative Auditor. I am here today to present the Office of the State Treasurer Unclaimed Property Program Audit. I will begin with background information starting on page 1 of the report. The mission of the program is to return abandoned property to the original owners or their heirs. Unclaimed property can include anything of value owed to an individual or business. Upon payment or delivery of the property, the state assumes custody and responsibility for its safekeeping. Funds in the property are held in perpetuity until such time as they are claimed. Any person or entity in possession of property belonging to a Nevada resident is considered a holder. A holder who delivers the property to the state is relieved of all liability arising thereafter. Exhibit 1 on page 2 summarizes the unclaimed property reporting process. The program maintains a searchable database of unclaimed property on its website. The reported owner, estate, lawful heir, or duly authorized representative may file a claim for the property. Exhibit 2 on page 3 summarizes the claims process. All unclaimed abandoned property is recorded in the state's abandoned property trust account. Money in the account is used to pay claims and fund the program. Remaining balances are distributed to various state funds in accordance with statute. Continuing on page 5, our audit objective was to evaluate the program's processes for collecting, administering, and returning unclaimed property. Page 6 begins the first chapter discussing our findings. On the bottom of page 6, we note that the program did not investigate unprocessed reports in a timely manner, and some deleted reports reappeared in the unclaimed property system due to a computer error. We identified a backlog of 397 unclaimed property reports received between fiscal years 2016 and 19. For 16 of the 37 reports tested, timely follow-up was not performed to identify why the report was not processed. Additionally, 7 of 37 reports appeared in the system after being deleted. Timely processing of reports is important because property listed on them is not visible to the public on the program's website until the reports are processed. On the middle of page 7, we discuss controls for deleting unclaimed property reports. The program needs to revise internal controls to segregate duties and maintain appropriate documentation for the deletion of reports from the unclaimed property system. For 8 of the 10 reports tested, the same person deleting the report also approved the deletion. Adequate segregation of duties reduces the risk of error, misuse, and fraud. Moving to page 8, we note that the program did not timely process unclaimed property. The program did not post 358 payments totaling $374,000 in property, dividends, and unclaimed securities collected in fiscal years 16 through 19. When unclaimed property payments are not posted, owners cannot claim or even know the state is in possession of their property. In the middle of page 9, we begin our discussion regarding the program's automated claims payment system known as Fast Track. The program did not adequately review Fast Track claims to ensure they were appropriately paid. As a result, weaknesses identified after a more thorough process was established may have existed for up to 2.5 years. The Fast Track system automatically pays claims meeting specific criteria. The process is completely automated with the system verifying property eligibility and claimant identity. Exhibit 5 on page 10 illustrates the Fast Track's claims process. On page 11, we note after our inquiry, the program strengthened its review process. The revised process identified one instance when the system inappropriately released a claim and stopped the claim before payment was made. 2 other instances were identified where criteria used by the Fast Track system was inappropriate. Due to the uniqueness of these issues identified, it is not likely a large number of claims were inappropriately paid. In the middle of page 11, we state that the program was not reviewing reports to monitor Fast Track claims as recommended by our prior audit. Page 12 contains 3 recommendations for strengthening the program's property reporting and claims process. Page 13 begins the second chapter of our report where we discuss the need to improve controls over the unclaimed property system and inventory. On the bottom of page 13, we note property data edits in the unclaimed property system were not reviewed as recommended in our 2010 and 15 audits. After our request, the fiscal year 19 reports were reviewed. However, for 3 reports, the reviewing employee also verified their own edits on the reports. Edits are reviewed to verify inappropriate changes are not being made to system data. In the middle of page 14, we discuss improvements needed to system access controls. The program did not perform routine reviews of system access and maintain a current list of authorized users. The program also has not developed effective controls when changing user access privileges. We determined one individual made 27 changes to their own access privileges with no documentation to support these changes. IT systems must have sufficient access controls to provide protection from unauthorized access, alteration, and disclosure of data. Page 15 begins our discussion regarding inventory control weaknesses. The program did not maintain accurate accurate and complete inventory records for the contents of unclaimed safe deposit boxes. We tested 35 boxes and identified 2 items that were properly disposed of, but were still listed in the inventory report. We were also unable to locate 14 items from 4 of the 35 boxes. Additionally, the program's inventory records contained errors and did not properly reflect savings bonds in the vault. We determined 6 of 20 saving bonds tested were not recorded in inventory. On page 16, we discussed timely processing of safe deposit box contents. Cash submitted with the contents of safe deposit boxes was not deposited in accordance with statute. In fiscal year 2019, a total of $84,000 in cash was recovered from unclaimed safe deposit boxes. We found all the cash deposits associated with these safe deposit boxes were made between 28 and 132 days late. Additionally, the program did not record tangible items contained in safe deposit boxes into the unclaimed property system in a timely manner. It took the program between 27 and 163 days to record the contents of safe deposit boxes. Our 7 recommendations for improving programs, property system, and inventory controls begin on page 16 and continue on page 17. Our audit methodology is located in Appendix A beginning on page 18. The State Treasurer's response to our recommendations is located in Appendix B on page 22. This concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer questions at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Alara. Appreciate that presentation. I'd like to open it up at this time to questions from committee members. Okay, I'll go ahead and lead off. On page 11, you talk about the fast track review process and that an instance of the system inappropriately releasing a claim to the wrong person. Does that appear to be something that the payment could be easily recovered, or does that present a problem for unclaimed properties?
Chairman Parks, for the record, Eugene Alera. The state agency under the process actually caught that before the payment was released to the inappropriate person and stopped it in time. So it did not actually get paid to the person.
Thank you. So for the most part, the fast track review process seems to be working quite well.
For the record, again, Chairman Parks, Eugene Alera. The current process seems to be working. The process that was in place when we started our audit had some issues and was not necessarily thorough enough, but under the new process, the agency was able to discover some flaws in the system and correct those.
Thank you for sharing that. And I guess my biggest concern seems to be the long period of time between, in some cases, numbers of days as far as processing and recording like the contents of safe deposit boxes and that. So committee members, questions for Mr. O'Lowery? Sorry. Okay. Okay, I'm not seeing anything, so I'd like to, at this time, ask the members from the Treasurer's Office to provide comment. I believe we have Linda Tobin and Tara Hagan.
Yes, good morning, Chairman Parks and members of the committee. This is Linda Tobin. I'm the Deputy Treasurer of the State of Nevada Unclaimed Property Program. I'd like to thank Mr. Crossman and LCB, and specifically Jean and Tammy, for their professionalism and their thoroughness and their help in the performance of this audit. Fresh set of eyes is always a positive thing, and we very much appreciate the feedback and suggestions provided as a result of this audit. As we know, there's always room for improvement and even stronger controls that we can put in place, and looking forward to having an even stronger program coming forward. I'd just like to take a second also and acknowledge our team at Unclaimed Property. We are a pretty small staff. Besides myself, there are only 11 of us and our team members. And just a touch of scope and scale of what our team does, for the fiscal year 2020 that just ended, we processed over 8,300 holder reports that had receipts that exceed $71 million, for total division receipts of over $87 million. We processed over 38,000 claims that we approved last year. We have returned $46 million to Nevadans and former Nevadans. And of those 38,000 claims, while we did have 26,000 plus go through our fast track process, we had an additional 10,000 that were manually reviewed and approved by staff. We have a nice transfer to the general fund this year, and we continue to look forward into improving our processes and serving the state. So a little bit just to touch back on for Senator Park, as you asked about the fast track process, it was very helpful for the audit findings that we were able to develop a very robust weekly audit of all of those approvals that go through. We did go through a very thorough review of the automated rules and business rules that improve those. As a result of the one instance of a missed payment, we were able to add an additional business rule through our automated process, and that has helped. In the case of our safekeeping processing for intakes, we have been able to make several changes already that have improved some of those. It's an inherently challenging task where we receive boxes as the banks deliver them. We have a very small claims team that has several different competing job duties. So to assist in the timeliness and of the processing intake, and also for the cash deposits, we have modified our inventory reports that the holders fill out to highlight the presence of cash. We've worked to stagger delivery of those boxes. We have also developed a draft policies and procedures to provide job duty allocation and timing of resources to try and keep our claims processing at a very short period while still facilitating the timely intake of safekeeping and processing of those items. We've also accept all of the recommendations and appreciate those. Several of them have to do with internal auditing processes. Those have all been implemented. We've also have draft policies and procedures that collectively address, I think that covers 4 of those. We have implemented additional policies and procedures regarding our holder reporting and processing of payments. I am very pleased to report that after several years of a backlog, we are entirely caught up. In the last fiscal year, we have had all of our reports processed or followed up on with adequate review being documented in our system within 30 days. We currently do not have any outstanding reports that span back a decade. So we have made significant strides in improving those processes and cleaning up that reporting and having those properties available back to Nevadans in a very timely manner. We have also, like I said, added additional policies and procedures regarding our safekeeping processes to help improve that as well. And with that, I'm happy to answer any other questions that yourself or the committee might have.
Thank you, Ms. Tobin, for that presentation, those comments. I'd like to ask if there's anybody on the committee would like to ask a question of Ms. Tobin. I have one question. It's not quite directly relevant to this audit, but it's my understanding that you do process unclaimed gift cards. And I was curious as to the portion of your workload that would deal with unclaimed gift cards. Any thoughts there?
So that is, yep. Yes, thank you, Chair Parks. We do accept gift cards in ordinary course of holder reporting. This is the same process that a business would report any other unclaimed property that we have. So it does not generate any additional workloads for us. When we get those, we still process those in course, and any gift cards that remain unclaimed do get transferred to the educational reimbursement account specifically.
Thank you. I think, could you repeat that last comment? I believe we lost you for a moment.
Sorry about that. Yes, so the gift cards do have specific handling in terms of their transfers within the state accounting, and gift cards themselves get allocated to the educational trust account as opposed to the general trust account that the rest of the unclaimed property goes to.
Okay, thank you very much. Sure appreciate that. Committee members, any final questions for Ms. Tobin? Okay, I'm not seeing any. I'd like to once again thank Ms. Tobin for your comments, as well as Mr. Alara and Ms. Getz for their audit presentation. And at this point, I'll take a motion to accept and approve the report.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion by Senator Gokachia, a second by Vice Chair Benitez Thompson. Discussion? I'm sorry? Okay. On the motion? Okay, not hearing, I'd like to ask Mr. Crossman to take roll.
Senator Brooks,
Yes.
Senator Goycochea,
Yes.
Chair Parks,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson,
Yes.
and Assemblywoman Carlton.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crossman. That motion passes. Okay. That concludes item 4D, and move on to the next item on our agenda is item 4E, and that's the Department of Public Safety Records, Communications, and Compliance Division. And the report deals with information security. And I believe.
Good morning.
Yes, is this Gaspara?
Yes,
Okay, welcome. Good morning.
thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the Audit Subcommittee. For the record, I am Sarah Gaspora, Deputy Legislative Auditor, Information Security. This report addendum provides supplemental findings, conclusions, and recommendations from our performance audit of the Department of Public Safety's Records, Communications, and Compliance Division, Information Security, LA 1812. We issued that report on January 17th, 2018. It contained 5 recommendations in regards to the management of network users, 2 recommendations to develop a disaster recovery plan for the division systems, applications, and data, and 3 recommendations to complete a service level agreement that defines backup requirements and is periodically reviewed for adequacy. An addendum to report LA 1812 was necessary because security vulnerabilities existed in certain information systems within the Records, Communications, and Compliance Division. Providing details regarding those vulnerabilities at the time we published the original report would have unnecessarily exposed those information security weaknesses. A letter pursuant to SB 302 was issued to the Governor, Chair of the Legislative Commission, Chair of the Audit Subcommittee, and Head of the agency affected upon identifying our findings related to the vulnerable systems. Since the division has performed sufficient corrective actions, we are issuing this addendum as a supplement to our original report. Readers are encouraged to refer to Report 1812 and this report addendum to gain a complete and comprehensive understanding of the audit scope, objective, findings, recommendations, and methodology. This addendum includes 4 additional recommendations to improve the security of the division servers. Please turn with me to page 1 of the report to begin discussing our audit findings.
The findings of the audit relate to server software lacking critical security updates. Many of the division servers had critical security vulnerabilities due to outdated and unsupported software. The division did not ensure that operating systems and database application software were upgraded to supported versions in a timely manner. After the outdated software was identified in August 2016, the division indicated it would require time and significant resources to initiate a project charter encompassing all of the outdated software that needed upgrading. Beginning in December 2017, the division entered into an end-of-life software upgrade project with a dedicated EATS project manager who served as a liaison to the division and coordinated efforts. This project was complex and involved commingled systems between various Department of Public Safety divisions with varying degrees of integration between servers, databases, and applications. These systems are critical to ensuring the protection of Nevada citizens, visitors, and sworn law enforcement officers. Over the course of the audit, we conducted monthly meetings to obtain status reports and monitor the progress of system and software upgrades. EATS successfully completed upgrading all of the division server software to current vendor-supported versions in March 2020. On the bottom of page 2, we made 4 recommendations to correct weaknesses in the division's information security controls and improve the security of the division servers. These recommendations will help ensure that the division has sufficient controls in place to prevent its operating systems and database application software on its servers from becoming outdated and unsupported. Page 3 of our report discusses our audit methodology. The division's response to our audit begins on page 5. The division accepted all 4 of our audit recommendations. This concludes my audit presentation. We're happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gaspara, for the presentation. I'd like to ask committee members if they have any questions for Ms. Gaspara. Okay, I'm not seeing any at this time. So in that case, I'd like to thank you for that presentation and like to ask members of the Department of Public Safety or the EATS department if they would like to make comments regarding the report.
Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Mindy McKay. I'm the Division Administrator with the Records, Communications, and Compliance Division within the Department of Public Safety. I have on the line with me today Susie Block with Enterprise IT Services and Tom Dorsey within my division to assist with answering any questions you may have after my comments. First, I would like to express my gratitude to LCB audit staff for their professionalism, patience, and assistance throughout this effort. I also greatly appreciate Enterprise IT Services and my staff for their hard work and diligence in addressing all of the audit recommendations. We will continue to strive for improvement, compliance, and efficiencies. As you know, IT efforts are never ending, costly, and lengthy, so we continue to address issues, work on enhancements and upgrades, and look for efficiencies. Our service level agreement, policies and procedures, constant monitoring, various duties we've implemented, and collaborative partnership with our IT service providers are important resources to ensure that we remain compliant. With that, I thank you for your time, and we are happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. McKay, for that presentation. I'd like to ask committee members if they have any questions for Ms. McKay. Okay, I don't believe there are any questions. So once again, thank you, Ms. McKay, and thank you, Ms. Gaspara, for your presentation. That concludes, unless there's any other questions, that concludes this report, and I'm happy to accept a motion to approve the report. We have a motion. We have a motion from Vice Chair Benitez Thompson. Do we have a second on that motion?
Second, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We have Senator Brooks seconds the motion. Mr. Crossman, would you be kind enough to do a roll call?
Senator Brooks,
Yes.
Senator Goycochea,
Yes.
Chair Parks,
Yes.
Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson,
Yes.
and Assemblywoman Carlton.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Crossman. The motion passes. Thank you. That concludes item 4E on our agenda, and that concludes the work for our agenda today. So I'd like to move on to item number 5, and item 5 is public comment. This is the final period of public comment. We're going to allow our technical staff a couple minutes to switch over so that their system can provide opportunity for members of the public a chance to call in. So let's take a 2-minute pause for BPS to line up any potential public comment. Okay, according to my timing, that's 2 minutes. Do we have anybody at BPS who can tell us if we have any public comment in the queue?
Yes, Chair, the public line is open and working. There are no callers at this time.
Okay, thank you very much for that assistance. Okay, we'll go ahead and conclude public comment. And I'd like to, before we adjourn, I'd like to just comment that I'm being advised by Mr. Crossman that we will probably need to have one more meeting before the 2021 legislative session begins. And so we will be contacting you to find out when is a good time it'll probably be somewhere early December or early January. So we'll follow up on that. Okay, with that, I don't believe there's anything else to come before us today. So we'll be adjourned. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, have a great day, and thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
See you all at IFC in a little while.
Yes. Thanks again. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Chair
Mr.
Parks.
President.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.